Hello, my name is Kate Argyle. I am the Local Heritage Education Manager for the East Region for Historic England. And what I'm going to do in this session is share with you some ideas about how you can discover your local heritage. I'm going to explain who I am, a bit more about the organisation before we start. So I'm going to share my presentation. Here we go. And as you can see straight away, what I'm doing is also part funded by the Department for Education. In fact, my work is funded by the Department for Education. As my role is very much to work with schools, I'll explain that. But what I'm going to do today is to take what I do with them and show it to you. So you don't have to be a teacher to do this. It's something that members of the public can do. But to start off with, I just wanted to explain who Historic England are. I get to move. You'll know us better possibly under our former title of English Heritage. The organisation, which is the public body that champions the nation's heritage, was divided into two parts in 2015, with English Heritage now being a trust that looks after, a charitable trust looking after the properties. And Historic England is the part of the organisation that was left behind, so the listing and planning and advice, and ourselves, Heritage Schools. You'll may be aware of Historic England's activity in King's Lynn. It's been a focus for a number of years now with the Heritage Action Zone. King's Lynn was one of the first to be set up, where Historic England works very closely with the Borough Council to look at using heritage to regenerate, to bring about regeneration, particularly in the high streets. And there's been an awful lot of conservation work going on within English heritage, along with some archaeology, which we'll talk about later. But if you want to know more, there are some links there. The Heritage Schools programme is a national programme. I cover the East region. I have 7 colleagues who cover other regions. And our role is to work with teachers. The aim of the programme is to help children develop a sense of place, an understanding and appreciation of what's really unique about where they come from, what's special about it, and a sense of pride in it. But for many teachers, this is not something they'll know about. They might not be local. I'm not local. I'm actually, I have to tell you this, I'm in Lincolnshire. I'm not a local expert, which is why it's so important that I find the experts in your local heritage, and that teachers do too. So that's what we do. We set up events, training events, where teachers from local schools can meet the representatives from the local museums or the library or the various heritage and creative services, so that they can then take that expertise back into the classroom. So that's what I do. So what I'm sharing with you today is what I often do in my training sessions. And what I often do is I show the teachers where they can find the resources they need to teach about the local heritage, about local history, local buildings, local people, and build that into their curriculum rather than doing stuff about London, say, or other parts of the country that are not as relevant to the children. So I'm sharing this with you, and as you'll see, there's a whole wealth of websites that mean that I can research heritage from across the East region, even though I'm not actually physically there, or that I don't know it very well. And you could do the same. So anything in blue is freely available. The red ones usually require a subscription, although certainly your local library will have, if not Ancestry, it'll have an equivalent. It has possibly Find My Past. So you can research the census in the local libraries without subscribing. Okay, the first thing we're going to look at then is how you can discover and go exploring using maps and aerial photography. One of the reasons for this is because Historic England holds a national archive of aerial photography at our headquarters in Swindon, and we produce packs for schools with aerial photographs as part of it, and we do some training around this and historic ordnance survey maps. I'm not going to go into all that with you, and the pack is not in the public domain because of copyright, but I will show you where you can find some other resources. So I always start with Google. It's always good to explore your area. I'm sure you've all had a good look at your house. So I always encourage the schools to do it, and often schools will use this. But it's a great way of introducing all sorts of vocabulary with kids, and concepts of scale, so you can zoom in and out. And I get a really good idea of the environment and you get to know what the main features are, what the type of geographical setting, I suppose, of a village or a town. And you can, of course, I get very carried away, and I love doing that. But you can also have a look at street views. So I did some training with the teachers at St Martha's, I think earlier this year, possibly back in 2019, but as I have with a number of schools in the town, I've actually been into them. So you can actually look at have a look on jumped ahead there, on the street view. Now these are the packs that we provide from Historic England for schools. Now you can have access to some of this stuff for your individual purposes, but there is a charge associated with them. What our programme allows is for the schools that join us to actually receive these through DFE support. But these packs or individual photographs are something you might want to access. But I'm going to show you where you can find them for free online. So they're not quite the same. And there are some wonderful websites that are freely available out there on the internet where you can find historic maps. One of them is the National Library of Scotland, which has digitised OS maps going up to, in fact, various maps, actually, sequences of maps, up to about the 1950s. So these are there. Now, it's a very complex site. It's way beyond me. I tend to just use this bit, but there are lots of other things that you can explore. So if you just click on the link I've put below, it would take you to this page. And each of those red squares is a map sheet. So you can zoom into whichever part of the country you want to look at. You click on the map square that you want to investigate, and it will tell you how many historic maps you can access down the side. And then you click on those and you can see them. And you can zoom in and out. You can see it in great detail. I find it, with my failing eyesight, I find it really useful to be able to zoom in. But it has the most brilliant side-by-side feature where you can have the modern satellite image alongside the map, and they move in sequence. So if you zoom in on one, it'll zoom in on the other and out, and the cursor allows you to pinpoint where particular buildings are. So for spotting what was there before your house was built, it's just wonderful. I play with that for hours. And this is what I mean about the clarity when you zoom in. So it gives you lots of detail. However, for Norfolk, you have something even better. So when I'm working in other counties, that's about as good as it gets. Some cities, Cambridge has a particularly good mapping system. London obviously does too. But for the vast majority of places, that's as good as it gets. However, for Norfolk, you have this wonderful website where they have digitised aerial surveys, aerial photographs, aerial satellite images, and also old maps, so that you can really be doctoring. You can travel back in time, and you can fade in and out. And I think it's a truly wonderful resource. So I'm going to show you the images from this. Obviously, you can click on the link and you can do this reel. It takes a little while just to work through the instructions, but you'll soon get the hang of it. It's a nice, easy to use, accessible site. If I can use it, anyone can, I think, is the criteria I'm using there. So it starts with a modern map. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor moving, but over on the left-hand side, you'll see where you can click the different layers on and off, and also where you can slide them in and out. So it takes, for example, the next one down that you click on is the 1988 vertical aerial photograph of Norfolk, and that layers it over exactly. So again, you can zoom in and out, and you can fade in and out. And it's a fantastic opportunity to spot what's changed. So I've taken this from the slides I produced for Gateway Primary and then used with St Martha's. So I was looking at their particular part of King's Lynn. And I've gone backwards. There we go. So it's there. So that's the area, and you can see the schools. There are some schools there. I think that's actually the secondary school that we've had already identified on the modern map, and then they can see it on the satellite. It's also a great way of identifying things that are changing, which is really, really interesting. I think it's a concept to develop in youngsters to appreciate how things have changed. But obviously for you guys, it's going to be really fascinating to see if that's when your house was built. So you can see building happening to the north of that school site. We can see bits that are there now that aren't anymore, or that weren't there in the past. And it's a great way of spotting when things changed. And really that's what we do. It's all about working back in time. So rather than teaching things in chronological order, what these maps enable you to do is to start with what you know and then work backwards, which is I find that much easier to understand. And the next image on this website is the 1946 aerial photograph that was taken by the RAF just after the end of the Second World War, which is a large jump, but still a fascinating insight into what's happened to the area in the second half of the 20th century. And of course it showcases so much of what had happened to places during the conflict. And you can zoom in. I'm looking at the whole area, but you can zoom in and look at one particular street. Sometimes the images, these photographs, it's 1946, so it's not going to, it'll only go in so far, but they are spectacular images. And again, we can see here now that we're looking where the school is and where many of the children live. Back in 1946 was just open fields. And you can see things like the estates being built to the south, where other schools are, like the Howard Infant School, etc. And you can see how it was all still either open farmland or it was part of the Gaywood House estate. And we can see more building that was happening to the north of the town as well. So we know that those residential estates, most of it social housing, was being built to rehouse people after the Second World War, but also to rehouse people who were coming from London as part of the moves to rehouse all those who'd been bombed out, but also to move them out. And many towns like King's Lynn, Norwich, Thetford, lots of towns in Suffolk saw this rapid development of residential housing at this time as part of this process of moving people out of London. Origin of lots of social housing. It's also got the railway. It's also good to point out some of these features that they might not be aware of. This site, Britain from Above, is freely available if you follow the link. And there are a number of, there's 15 photographs, some of them taken in the 1920s of King's Lynn, that are freely available. Now we have others in the pack for the schools, because schools have different copyright freedoms than public domain. But these are available for you to look at. And many people have added comments identifying various places. And what's so beautiful about this website is it's showing you oblique photos where the photograph's been taken out, not directly down, but at an angle. So you get a wonderful image like this. So this one from 1941, taken flying over from West Lynn, showing the ferries, showing, you can see towards the docks. And to the north end of the town, I think that spire must be St Nicholas's. So some absolutely wonderful images of the river and Kings, and then looking to the hinterland. Here we have another one. I'm not sure if I got the date for this one. That was after me. Anyway, but you get the idea of the sort of, you can see St Margaret's there, can't you? Set out beautifully in the Saturday marketplace. Yeah. Endlessly fascinating. Of course, you can zoom in on these and you can begin to identify. So if we look beyond that, we can see the parkland area of in Gaywood, rather than the social housing. This is from 1928. It says it at the top. There we go. So going back to the map website, the Norfolk government one, Norfolk County Council one, you can. The next one back is the first Ordinance survey of Norfolk and of King's Lynn, which happens in between 1879 and 86. So we're right back in the height of the Victorian era, aren't we? And we can see a much smaller town. We can see the significance of the railways. Gaywood is little more than a village, and there's a big separation. Of course, all that's been filled in with building ever since. Lots of orchards and nurseries around. We can see the parkland of Gaywood Hall. And again, you can zoom in and look at it in more detail. And that, again, we can still identify where the school area is because it follows the field boundaries. And often field boundaries survive. This is what I mean about being able to zoom in. So you can see the detail of Gaywood Hall and how that linked to the Bishop's Palace. And of course, what you can be doing all the time is you can be fading in and out. And you can move around, so you aren't restricted by map sheets when you're looking at these. And it means you can look all over the town and identify buildings that are no longer there, or that have been changed. And of course, one of the ones that I'm going to focus on later is this one here. I'm not going to mention its name at the moment. Now, there are 2 more maps that you might be lucky enough to find, whatever it is you're looking for, your house, I'm assuming, on this website, but unfortunately they're not complete. So we have tithe maps, which were produced in around about the 1840s, at the time when payments to the church were converted into money payments, and so maps were drawn up to calculate what was owed, the tax. Some of these exist. If they're not on here, it may well be that they haven't survived, but it's certainly worth consulting the archive in the town hall in King's Lynn to see what Luke has. The other one, which again King's Lynn's aren't there, are the enclosure maps. I can't believe this is all that survived, actually, because I'm sure I've seen more than this, but those are the ones that have been digitised on this site. But again, it's worth having a look for those. And if you do find them, they're beautifully done, and they're wonderfully illustrated. Now, there are more maps. I'm going to show you some more in now. So this, again, the Norfolk.gov site does have older maps of the Ordnance Survey, but because they aren't drawn to scale in the same way, they can't be overlapped. So you have to look at these separately, and you can't fade them in and out in the same way. But this shows King's Lynn. We can look at it in the 1860s. And we can zoom in and have a look. And again, you can see how much smaller the town was, and you can see how Gaywood is a separate village. Here we're looking at it in the 1830s. And we have Bryant's map of Norfolk in 1826. So again, we can look at that. And then Faden's map from the 1790s, I find particularly, I use this quite a lot. It is on this website, but it also has a website all of its own. It's so significant, and that one's particularly useful. There's been quite a lot of, there's all sorts of resources that you can use on here, but I particularly like you look at plates of it, and I particularly like downloading these because of the colour. I find it's particularly good to use with the youngsters. And what this shows is not just Lynn Regis, not still, the King's Lynn on here. Again, this sort of thing, and you can see Gaywood across here. I think we've gone. If we went a bit further, you'd see. Yeah, you can see Gaywood here. But what it shows is the fenland in between. So if you have a house on any of this bit, it might explain why your garden's a bit soggy. But some fascinating detail on here about brick kilns and turnpikes and Reefley Wood. Fascinating place. So if you're up in the Wootons as well, there's all sorts of fantastic stuff you can look at. I have to say, perhaps you can tell, even though I'm an historian, not a geographer, I find these historic maps really fascinating. There are other town maps. We can go back to 1725 here, where we can still see the outlines of the defences built at the time of the Civil War, I believe. And here we have Holler's map, which must have been from before 1677. So you can see those, this obviously helps us understand King's Lynn, what happened to King's Lynn during the English Civil War, where it withstood sieges, etc. There we are. I think this one actually possibly goes back earlier. And again, you can, very great looking at these maps to identify the different parts and how the mill fleet and the purfleet separated out the different parts of the town and developing it. Now, our Heritage Explorer site has changed. I have to say these slides are rather old, but of course, having looked at aerial photographs, it's good to sort of find sources for normal photographs. I'm going to show you some of these. These are still available on the website, although this particular version of it has changed. And I'm going to show you some other places you can find photos. But this one of the passenger ferry, some of our older residents might actually recognise or remember using the ferry across from West Lynn, and I know it still runs today. It's interesting because having talked to teachers at West Lynn Primary, I think they do this with the children still, so they still make sure they know it. But there's lots of images on here showing, so if you find, for example, there's a smithy, you can have a look at images of the smithy being used. And I've tried to pick ones from different parts of they're not all from King's Lynn, but they are from Norfolk. So in the days of things like potato riddling, and of course steam trains. Oh. Right, this is another rather exciting type of map that you might be interested in. This website is actually just a commercial website. It's not one that's specific. It's just that I've discovered that you can access it. These particular images you can just access for free. If you want very detailed ones, or if you want to buy them, you have to pay, but you can just have a look for your own self. And there's a series of maps on here that might be of interest. One about trees, which I quite like. But the LiDAR image that you can see here is it's a different way of analysing the data from satellite imagery. I'm trying to find, I'm desperately scanning through the notes on here to see if it talks about how, but essentially what this does is it measures the height above and below sea level. So you get the topography of the area, and the bluer it is, the lower it is, I think is essentially the message. And as it gets yellow, green and then into yellow, it's higher. So you can see why King's Lynn has some issues, not that we are surprised why flooding might be an issue. But what's so nice about this is that you can zoom out. I just put in the postcode for a place in the centre, and that's what that square is. So that square's going to stay the same on all these images. You can obviously see the river. And then you can pull out and you can begin to see the higher ground beginning to appear to the east. And you can see how things have been built on slightly high. So you can see how King's Lynn is on slightly higher ground to the surrounding area. Now when you pull out, obviously the wash is just shown in white, it's not been measured, but you can then see the huge area of the fens extending to the south and to the west. Right the way crossing to Lincolnshire. It looks a bit like that round by me as well. And then south going to Cambridge. And you can just see the tips of the Ouse and the Nene washes as well. And then you can see the higher land as we go into as you go across down the wonderful A47 into Norfolk, or up to the coast. And of course you can pull out and see the whole of the region, which shows not only the whole area of the fens, but you can see the Broads over on the east coast, and you can see all the low-lying land on the east coast, including the Thames estuary. So all of those of us who are in trouble from global warming. Okay, so just from looking at maps, and here I was pulling out for the schools in Gaywood, what we could just see from their map of different things that they might go off to explore. So things like the railways, toll roads, mills, all sorts of things to do with postal housing. And that's without actually even going into King's Lynn itself. So maps and aerial photographs are a wonderful way to discover what you've got around you and to uncover perhaps things that have since been torn down or have changed, been built on, so on and so forth. Okay. So number two, I'm going to do this very quickly because if you can manage it, there is another recording by me where I look in detail at the built heritage, because earlier this year and towards the end of last year, we worked on a project as part of the Heritage Learning Forum and the Heritage Education Network, and with a wonderful local artist called Nicola Mary Woods, on what's called a scroll through Lynn. And you can see an image, some of the images there. We used some of their, repurposed some wonderful artwork that Nicola did. She redrafted a lot of it, and we turned it into a resource for local schools. You can see there, if you want to find out more about Nicola and her work, or talk to her about the scroll, you can see the whole thing. We went for a scroll, like a Bear tapestry affair, rather than a book. We thought this was something different and possibly a bit more useful, a visual, something that could go on a wall. And what Nicola had done is she'd selected buildings and people and events and boats, ships, different types of ships that told the story of Lynn from 1204, from the charter, right the way through to the present. And as I say, all local schools that attend our education network, and I think that's most of them now, they've received copies of this, and I put together a resource which helped them then investigate all the different elements. Just as a starting point. I am no expert, but it was a starting point of where to go. And of course, all the local museums and support organisations were involved too. Here you can see a larger version of it, and this is Rachel Williams from Stories of Lynn, the Learning and Engagement Officer with some of the young people that she was working with, showing a copy of it again. Right, so if you want to know more about that, you need to go and find the other recording that I've done as part of the King's Lynn History Festival, if you can stand listening to me for more than you are doing now. Okay, so I'm not going to talk too much about this, but I'm going to talk to you about your listed buildings, because the vast majority of the buildings that Nicola chose are on Historic England's national list. So the list is where the buildings that are so important that they've been given legal protection by the state are listed, and all the information is kept. Now, there's nearly 500,000 of these, and they cover all sorts of things. Some very obvious, like St Margaret's, you know, like the Minster Church, for example, but some quite quirky things as well. So there are a couple of roller coasters on there, for example, and some agricultural buildings. The big campaign from 2014 to 2018 was to list war memorials. So a lot of those have, and lots of school children got involved in that campaign in particular. So I'm going to just show you what it looks like. So if you go to the Historic England website, you can search for all the listed buildings in Kings and around King's Lynn, or anywhere else in the country if you are interested. And if it is listed, it'll be marked on the map. Now, I've done a map search. You can just search through a list, obviously through a list. But if it is listed, it's marked with a little blue triangle. So if we take this one over here, that's set out on its own. This is what you get when you click it and you go to the listing. It has some technical details. It has dates and catalogue numbers, listing numbers, and so on and so forth. It'll have the reference, grid reference, and so on and so forth. And then it has some details that, to be honest with you, don't mean a great deal to me. It's a house, and it gives us a date, which is very useful. But the actual description is very technical. I feel it was never intended really initially for members of the public. So what Historic England have been trying to do is realise that this is a fabulous resource, but it's not very user friendly. They've made the website's very good now, but they've been adding photographs like this one. So this is what we're looking at here, Elmer Lodge, and that means an awful lot more to somebody like me, and possibly to you. And what we are hoping is, or encouraging, is members of the public, I've been working with schools to do this, to actually add even more. So that's all that's added to this. There are no other contributions. Quite a lot of the buildings in King's Lynn, people have added their own photographs to it. And that's what we'd like you to do. So you can join in. You just have to register. It doesn't cost anything. And then you can search, and you can go and take photographs. And now, obviously, this is directed very much at teachers and schools, the slide I've got here, but it can be members of the public. And we've been working with schools across the country to get the children to engage with these significant buildings, because they're very much a part of what makes a place special. If you're not careful, it's very easily they can go. So it can be whole class projects, but it can equally be you and your family out for one of your for a bit of exercise. Take your phones with you, take some photographs, and go back and upload them. And might even be the focus for a nice heritage trail for you to go and search out some of the more obscure ones. You can bet St Margaret's will have quite a lot added, but Elmer Lodge none. So the challenge, see how many you can find. Now, what I show to many of the teachers I work with is how the buildings can lead into really exciting inquiries that can open up whole parts of history for the people, and make for the children they're teaching, and to show that events that they might be learning about in history, or events they might be reading about in English, all sorts of things, were relevant to them, relevant to their town. So if we take a building like this one, not every teacher that I do this with knows what this is or knows where it is, because they're not all familiar with King's Lynn itself. Some of them might live somewhere else. They might be new to the area. They might just not have driven around there. But you might recognise what it is. But I'm not looking for, and sometimes people will blurt out and say what they know about it, but it's just a way of just looking at it closely and looking at the number and the of windows and the style of windows, the materials it's built with, the architectural shapes and so on and so forth, the size of it. And then once having looked very closely, to then begin to think, well, what might it be? What might I be able to work out about this building from what I can see in this picture? And then generating lots of questions. What is it? Where is it? Why has it got so many windows? Who built it? Who uses it? Who lives it? What happens there? And the children can generate then their own inquiries to go and investigate. Now, going back to our photographs, our aerial photographs, this one here, again from the Britain from Above site, shows the building before it, when it was still intact. It has been altered. And so this one shows it in 1928. And the label on here says Poor Law Institution and Infirmary. If we then go and refer back to the maps we were looking at, and there's that one that I showed you that shows King's Lynn Union Workhouse. So what we're looking at is the front of the building that was the workhouse. Now there's a wonderful website with people who are clearly dedicated to finding out all the details about workhouses around the country, and they have researched this. So you can click on this one and find out all the information, loads of information about King's Lynn Union Workhouse. So it talks about how it became what you might know it as now as St James's Hospital. Oh, but that closed in 1985. Now it's offices for the Health Authority. If only I read my own notes. So maps. But what I particularly love, because much as I love built heritage and maps and everything, I think it's the people that and their stories that are really what we want to get to, isn't it? I mean, exploring our local heritage. And what you can see on the workhouse.org website is the 1881 census return, where they list all the residents of the workhouse at that time. And it talks about not just the staff, but also the inmates. And there's lots of information on here about where they came from, their age, sex, their marital status, and something about the job that they might have done in the past, or their profession. Also, if they are handicapped, I'm afraid they weren't very PC about the things they wrote. Deaf and dumb isn't too bad. There's some worse ones later on. But really exciting to explore this, particularly if you can't get to the library or you can't subscribe to Ancestry or Find My Past. Yeah, again, on our old education website, we have teaching resources about workhouses, so that look at inquiries and provide evidence there. And these are freely available, so you will probably still find these, although the Heritage Explorer has been changed. But your local newspapers are full of stories about these places, and newspapers are one of the resources that I love to research if I get time. And of course, as we approach Halloween, it's good to know that this is some nice ghostly secrets in this old building. I'm not surprised. Workhouses were truly appalling places, deliberately so. So we're over halfway through. You'll be glad to know. I'm just going to pause and have a drink before we move on to our third area. For many of my teachers in primary schools, the maps and buildings are all lovely and great, but actually what they need is to uncover a much more distant history, because they're looking at events before 1066. So they need the archaeology. So I'm going to show you where you can find that. In fact, the King's Lynn and West Norfolk has an archaeological society. Excuse me, and they would certainly be the experts in this. I'm not, again, claiming this. I'm just going to show you where you can make a start. One of the things that often can indicate how old a place is its name. There are websites, in fact I've forgotten to put the link on here, I do apologise, but you can look up the meaning of names. So Lynn, that word, is possibly a Celtic name, which suggests that the place might have an older human habitation than Saxon. Most of our village and town names have Old English origins, Saxon, Anglo-Saxon. But this one is older. I'm not going to attempt to explain why it's kings and when it was bishops. I'm going to leave the actual history bit for you to find out. But I'm just going to show you where you might make a start. Now, when it comes to finding the archaeology, this can be quite a complex thing. There is the professional site, Heritage Gateway, is not for the faint-hearted. As a teacher of many years, I always found this a little daunting, but I have got used to it. So if you click on there, it's freely available, and you type in King's Lynn, and then it searches about 45 different organisations to find what they have listed. And it took me a long time to realise that I could ignore everything apart from the one for the particular county. So what you're looking to get to is the Norfolk Historic Environment Record. And once you do, it showcases for you that 154 listed finds for King's Lynn. And if you click on any one of these, you can see there's Neolithic hand axes, there's obviously buildings that, look, we've got Paleolithic hand axes possibly, we've got lots of Bronze Age finds, Iron Age pottery, just fabulous. If you're a Key Stage 2 junior school teacher, in essence, this is absolutely brilliant. And you can click on each one of these and it will tell you some more details. Now you'll notice that some of these are not, they will say poorly located, and so they were quite old finds that weren't necessarily mapped. But some of the others, when you go in there, will be, and I'll show those in a moment. Yeah, so I think I'm going to do it now, actually. No, I'm not. However, once again, Norfolk has come up trumps and has this fabulous Heritage Explorer website. This has been created by the Norfolk Historic Environment Service, and it is just a treasure trove of information about the archaeological heritage that you have around you in Norfolk, which is spectacular. You have some of the oldest finds of human activity and habitation outside in Europe. It's phenomenal what you have around you. So you can, again, it's freely available. It makes my research for Norfolk schools a joy and makes me very conscious of how limited it is in other parts of the country I have to do this for. So it's truly spectacular what you can find on here. And what I use most of the time are the parish summaries. So here's the parish summary for King's Lynn. You get there by going to Exploring More and finding the parish summaries. So it says there, click on Explorer, parish summaries, choose a letter, find your parish. So it's very straightforward. But what's so beautiful, apart from a chronological summary of the findings for King's Lynn, or most of them, it puts the reference numbers as hyperlinks. So if you click on those, it will take you to that specific find. So if we're looking here at the very earliest evidence of human activity, which is Paleolithic, which is the first humans. If you click on these, and actually I'm going to click on the second one because I already had a look at the first one, didn't have a map reference. But the second one did. And so I know that the hand axe was found here, probably when they were building the houses, or possibly when they were working on the roads. And you can work out where that is. Can I work out? Yes, so it's Wootton Road, so this must be South Wootton, up round here. I hope that's right. Yeah, it says Reffley Lane, so this must be Reffley Wood. My apologies if I've got the geography wrong. But what's so exciting is when you see one of those dots and it's on your school field, or it's on your house or on your road. And so for the youngsters doing this, it means it's relevant. So your Paleolithic era is thousands of years ago. You know, for kids who are 6 and 7, this is inconceivable amounts of time, but it was happening where they live. And I think that makes it so much more exciting and relevant. Now, obviously, the people who have many of these artefacts and to go to for expertise, apart from the society, is going to be your museums, particularly Lynn Museum. In their logo, they're celebrating the fact that they have Seahenge, the most spectacular Bronze Age ceremonial site, actually preserved in the museum. And the staff there are extremely knowledgeable and more than happy to welcome you there and talk about archaeology. We all can't wait to talk about archaeology, about our various passions when it comes to heritage and history. And obviously, we've mentioned ancient buildings that you have around you too. Okay, so We're nearly there. Having talked about this, I'm coming to the part where we're going to talk about finding people. Now, again, I'm not claiming to be an expert, and I have to say that what you're looking at here is my personal work. It's not sort of, I'm very conscious about, that I'm talking as an individual here. So I'm going to showcase how I do it. There are other ways to do it. There are other sites, there are other sources, but this is one way that you might do it. What I'm going to showcase is how we advise teachers with working with their class to actually go back in time and find out who was living in the streets or the village or that part of town 100 years ago. So looking back to the Victorian, Edwardian eras, and to actually try and find the people. Now, you can sometimes do it for earlier age groups, but this is the focus for this activity. And if you're interested, there is a video showing the wonderful Catherine McHarg, who can actually do it properly, actually showcasing this activity for teachers if you want to have a look. And I am going to talk about how this can help us research soldiers from the First World War in this as well. And the first source of information that I use are historical directories. Now, these are available in these red books, famous red books in libraries and archives as reference. But the University of Leicester have digitised them. So for any part of the country, you can look these up. It's quite a tricky website. I don't find it an easy one to use. And perhaps it's got something to do with the broadband in the fens, but it's not easy to use. So I normally do this for schools. And for any county, you search by county first of all, and you can normally access about 10 to 12 directories from about the 1850s, 1830s if you're in a big place like Norwich, possibly the King's Inn, right the way through to around about the time of, I think the most recent will be 1919, 1920. And this is what they showcase. So this is a page from the 1912 one for Norfolk, Kelly's directory, and you get massive information in there. I haven't included it all, but it's a fascinating read. And they were designed a bit like sort of the Yellow Pages come telephone book before there were telephones. So you get descriptions of the town, you get all the details about when to post your letters, and all the names and lists of all the official organisations, churches, schools, local government, the military, a fascinating insight snapshot of the town at that time. And then people paid to have their name put in the directory, and you get them into two groups. So we can see where it changed. This is the page for King's Lynn. And you can see as we get to the end of the private residents who wanted their name in the directory. Imagine that. I'm not sure when it must have switched. The phone made it switch to be Posh to be X directory. So you get their house, and then you turn to the list of commercial people. And this is when you can, I've only put a snapshot because obviously there are many pages for King's Inn. For villages, it might just be a very short entry, but you can also look at the fantastic range of professions that were going on. So again, a real snapshot of life in 1912, and some really fascinating businesses and professions, many of which of course have gone. So I think particularly with the villages you see it, because obviously most villages have nothing anymore. You know, they're lucky if they've still got their school, and if they've still got a pub, and if they've still got their post office, they're doing extremely well. So to find out that you'd have tailors and dressmakers and cow keepers and possibly artificial teeth makers, that's one of my personal favourites. You can find all these different professions in there. And what I use them for is for the next stage, which is I want names. So what this does is it tells me that Walter Edmund Fillingham, tailor and post office of 8 Spring Terrace, which is in Gaywood, lived, you know, I've got his name now. So I've got his name and his address and his profession. And it means I can do the next step, which is to look on the census. Now, I subscribe to one of these organisations that allow me to access the census. You can do this for free at the library, but if you want to do it in the comfort of your own home, you have to subscribe, and it's not cheap. So I'm afraid that's just how it is. I obviously help the schools to do this. So that's one of the things I could do is to help them with it. And we do have the census along with other parish records available for many years. So it's obviously it's the the mainstay of the genealogists and people doing family history. But there's all sorts that you can discover this way. I'm going to show you a little snapshot. So here he is, Walter Edmund Fillingham, and we know quite a bit about him already. So I was able to then look him up in the 1911 census. Now that's the most recent one we can access. You can go back to 1841. They were done differently. This is the first time that people filled in their own returns. So a lot more information in here than in some of the earlier ones. And you're able to, as you can see, this is the the websites. I'm using Ancestry here. There are other ones available, but you can see they've sort of got the form that shows that. And if I was to click on here, I could then trace Walter back into the earlier censuses. I can see here, for example, it mentions that he has a service record. He's mentioned in World War I service records. Well, see, because he's 49 in 1911, I don't think he's going to be a soldier. So it'd be interesting to see what the reference is there, possibly as the recipient of a pension. We can also look at what he left in his will. I hate to worry you, but you know, there's so much more. And there's obviously a whole list more of documents that he appears in. But let's first of all have a look at his census return. So this is what one looks like for 1911, and we can see here Walter E. Fillingham, married to Rosanna. We can see their ages. We can see they've been married 21 years, that they've had 3 children, all of whom have survived, and in fact, they're all still living with them. So we have 3 boys, 3 sons, Sidney, Albert, and Stanley. We can see what they all do. So obviously postmaster, general dealer, wife assisting, Sidney is a postman. We have a messenger, so Albert is acting as taking the telegraphs out there. And Stanley is at school. We can see where they were born. They obviously live in the post office because they work at home. And they don't always show the full address on the returns. So we can work out all sorts of information. We can see how many rooms their house has got, all sorts of details we can investigate. And this is where it's really good to explore some of the photographic sources we have. So I've shown you how Historic England have a number, but Norfolk Library Services have had a project called Picture Norfolk, which is just a treasure trove of fantastic images of people in Norfolk in the past. And this one shows a rather grumpy gentleman with a fabulous moustache waiting to post his letter in Surlingham in 1910. But I love the post boy. I imagine that being Sidney or Albert with the bicycle. You see the helmet or the cap. So wonderful to help the children understand what we're talking about when they can see an image of it. As I said, you can find out about their wills as well. So yeah, so those records there, that's the 100-year rule, really, isn't it? So we can find out all sorts about when they died and where and so on and so forth, how much they left. Now, as I mentioned, Walter appears in the World War I soldiers' records, and that's because his son Albert fought in the First World War. I'm not going to tell you any more about that. That's for a different story. But just sometimes the records of First World War I soldiers, some of them survived the Second World War. There was a direct hit, I think, on the Somerset House in London where they were stored. So many of them were lost. But Albert survived, and we can even tell how tall he was and how big his chest was. On some of them, they mark down eye colour and if they've got any tattoos and stuff like this. So we can find out quite a lot about when he joined up in the First World War. I'm just looking for a date. And it's looking like he was conscripted because it's looking like 1916. It's not for definite, but we can see how old he was. He's 20 years, 10 months. So of course this leads into projects around World War I. So if you want to research war memorials, now of course this has been a big project. I've done lots of work on this over the past few years as we've been commemorating the 100th anniversary of the First World War. And of course Kingsland, I was looking at this again, I'm focusing on Gaywood here because I just pinched this one off of the different areas of Kingsland that I've done. But you can take the names and do the same things. You can find them in the census returns and you can see what you can find. There is also a website called Roll of Honour, where volunteers or enthusiasts have been doing this for the war memorials. And they've looked at King's Lynn War Memorial, they've looked at the Post Office War Memorial, and they have researched the names as well. So you can go in and just do it on that rather than trying to do it all yourself. Going back to the Picture Norfolk website, sometimes you find them on there when you're researching a particular place. So when I was researching Gaywood, I came across Second Lieutenant Sizeland, who tragically was killed in action on the 12th of October in 1916. So how old was he there? Age 26. So some very poignant, moving stories when you begin to investigate this, particularly again at this time of year as we're coming up to remembrance. Makes it very real when they're no longer just a name, and sometimes just an initial and a surname, but you actually know where they lived and how old they were and all these sort of details. And you could go on to look at other websites like Commonwealth War Graves Commission website, where you can find out where they were buried. And I remember when I first did this, it was quite a surprise to me to find how many soldiers were buried back here in cemeteries in the UK, rather than in the big war cemeteries in Belgium and France. And in fact, the vast majority of villages do have Commonwealth War Graves in them, so you can go and visit them and remember them that way. So lots of ways in which you can research those names once you've got the names. I wanted to finish by, because we're looking at discovering your local heritage, I think it's really important, as we're still in October and it is Black History Month, that we recognise that Black history is part of our heritage. It is our heritage as much as the rest of it. And I wanted to just share with you some ways in which you can make yourself more aware. If you're not, wrong to assume. I have to say I wasn't aware of how much or how long the history of Black people in the east part of the country was compared to places like Liverpool or London or Bristol, Birmingham. I was ignorant of that, so this has been really good for me to find this out. But it also opens up all sorts of other parts of our history to do with migration in general. And these are obviously really pertinent at the moment with what's happening in the world, but also I think in looking at diverse histories in general, rather than just at the main things. So I'm just going to show you a couple of websites if this interests you. And obviously the focus tends to be on the slave trade. There's a long history of the presence of Black people and of migrant people. After all, the English are migrants. That's clear. And in fact, the vast, at some point, everybody migrated to this part of Europe. So there's a very, very long history, which if you are interested in, you can contact. Certainly, I would go to King's Lynn Museum, where they have lots of information about that history. But we're going to start with the obvious one of the slave trade. And this website here, I have to tell you, I think I've been terrible and not put the link, but it's from the UCL, the University College London, and they have a database of people in this country who benefited from the compensation paid to slave owners. So this shows the people who were making money from the slave trade. And you can search by area. You can see there are a couple of pins up by King's Lynn, quite a few around Norfolk, and these tell individual stories. I haven't included lots of information, but some of these you can get down as far as actually finding the names of the slaves they owned. So it does depend. You can find out where the plantations were. You can find out all sorts of information about it. So it is a fascinating insight into a world we'd really rather forget, but I think is so important for us to know about. Oh, I have put it there. Oh, there we go. And what this leads on to is to look at the impact it was having around us in Norfolk. And in particular, people are making fortunes from this trade and what it built. So we have a built legacy. This is a Garbaldisham Old Hall, which has gone. I think this is actually Rushford Lodge. Oh well, but the story is there. And one that definitely still exists is Earsham Hall. And we can find out the story of the people who owned it and how they were making their money through sugar plantations out in Jamaica in this instance. And actually, as I say, you can then go and look at the situation in Jamaica and look at the plantation, and they have digitised some of those records, so you could even find out the names of the slaves. And they're really quite shocking. It is shocking when you actually see it in black and white, how they categorised these people. Of course, it's much more comfortable to focus on the very prominent role that Norfolk and East Anglian people in general played in the abolition movement. Some very famous faces there. Elizabeth Fry, Thomas Paine, Harriet Martineau. So some very prominent Georgians and that were campaigning. And a particular link for King's Lynn is the Berkeley family and the Burneys, who were actively, or even though Berkeley inherited a plantation, what he did with it as part of his because of his Christian beliefs, his Quaker beliefs, was to actually free these slaves and to set up a system for them in Philadelphia. So that has a direct link to. So it's good to focus on the good side, isn't it? I think it's very important, though, that we don't assume that all abolitionists were white. It can very easily become that sort of white saviour story. And there were black abolitionists in the region as well, from the region. Here we have a number of them who travelled around campaigning against slave trade. You can have a look there. I've not done this, but what this slide should show you how you can actually bring this up to date. I think we tend to focus very much on that particular thing, and it's really important to recognise how communities, how we have the modern influence that the black community has in our region, and this slide should show you that, apart from I've not animated it very well. And I think that's it. No, there should be one more coming. There we go. And then just to say that Norfolk is very at the forefront, I think, of commemorating Black History Month, and I think it's worth recognising that at the fantastic work they do. Well, thank you very much for listening to me. If you have managed to stick it through the entire talk, I'm going to stop sharing now. And for me to thank you very much for your time, and to hope it's been useful and interesting. If there are any questions, if you need any more information about this, if you wish to contact anybody if you want to contact Lindsay Bavin at Trews Yard, or Rachel Williams at Stories of Lynn, or Melissa Hawker at King's Lynn Museum, they will put you in contact with me, or you can look for me, Kate Argyle at Historic England, so kate.argyle at historicengland.org.uk. I'd be very happy to hear from you and to answer your questions. And if I've got anything terribly wrong, you can let me know that too. So just remains for me to say goodbye, and thank you very much.